The termination meeting lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I stood in the marble-floored executive conference room, staring at Derek Morrison, the spoiled heir to Morrison Data Solutions, as he delivered the news with characteristic arrogance. "For 9 years, I kept all 25 of your father's data centers online," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Now you're firing me for your girlfriend?" Derek straightened his expensive tie and sneered. "Effective immediately," he snapped, clearly enjoying his power trip. I removed my security badge and placed it on the polished conference table. "You have 5 minutes before every single one of those data centers goes offline." 9 years earlier, I had walked into Morrison Data Solutions as Sarah Chen, a 26-year-old network administrator with a computer science degree from University of Texas and more determination than experience. The company occupied a gleaming office tower in downtown Dallas, managing critical data infrastructure for Fortune 500 companies across the southwestern United States. Thomas Morrison, Derek's father, had built the business from a single server room into a regional powerhouse with 25 data centers spanning Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. His reputation for reliability was legendary in the industry. Morrison Data Solutions maintained 99.9% uptime, a statistic that had made him wealthy beyond imagination. During my interview, Thomas impressed me with his genuine passion for technology and his commitment to excellence. Unlike many executives who viewed IT as a necessary expense, Thomas understood that his company's success depended entirely on technical expertise and operational reliability. "Our clients trust us with their most critical systems," Thomas explained, as he walked me through the company's network operations center. "Banks, hospitals, government agencies, they all depend on our infrastructure to keep their operations running. We don't just provide services, we provide peace of mind." The Network Operations Center was my dream workplace, a high-tech command center filled with wall-mounted displays showing real-time status of every data center, server room, and network connection. Dozens of technicians monitored systems around the clock, ready to respond to any issue within minutes. Thomas offered me a position as junior network administrator, with the promise of rapid advancement based on performance rather than seniority. The salary was competitive, but more importantly, the work was challenging and meaningful. I would be responsible for maintaining critical infrastructure that kept entire industries functioning. My first major project involved upgrading network security across all data centers to prevent cyber attacks. Working 18-hour days for 3 months, I designed and implemented encryption protocols that exceeded industry standards while improving system performance. The successful deployment caught Thomas's attention and earned me promotion to senior administrator within my first year. Derek Morrison was 23 when I started at the company, fresh out of business school and clearly expecting to inherit his father's empire without earning it. He worked in the sales department but showed little interest in understanding the technical complexities that made the business successful. While Thomas mentored promising employees and invested in cutting-edge technology, Derek focused on expense account dinners and networking events with potential clients. He possessed his father's charm but none of his work ethic or technical curiosity. "Technology changes too fast to master," Derek once told me during a company barbecue. "The smart approach is hiring people who understand that stuff while focusing on relationships and strategy." His attitude concerned me because Thomas was already in his 60s and had begun discussing succession planning. Derek would eventually inherit control of the company, but his lack of technical knowledge could prove disastrous for a business built entirely on technological excellence. Over the next several years, I became Thomas's most trusted technical advisor. When major clients experienced emergencies, he called me directly rather than going through departmental hierarchies. When new technologies emerged, I provided recommendations that guided the company's strategic investments. My expertise covered every aspect of the business: network architecture, server management, security protocols, and disaster recovery procedures. I had personally configured most of the equipment in our data centers and maintained detailed documentation for every system. The work was demanding but rewarding. I solved complex problems that stumped other technicians, prevented cyber attacks that could have crippled client operations, and designed backup systems that guaranteed business continuity during natural disasters. My reputation within the industry grew as colleagues recognized my expertise. Thomas compensated my contributions generously. My salary reached 6 figures by my 3rd year, along with performance bonuses and stock options that reflected my value to the organization. More importantly, he treated me as a strategic partner rather than just an employee. Derek's relationship with his father became increasingly strained as Thomas expressed disappointment with his son's lack of technical development. Several times, I overheard heated arguments about Derek's future role in the company and whether he was prepared for leadership responsibilities. "You can't manage what you don't understand," Thomas said during one particularly intense exchange. "This business requires technical expertise, not just charm and connections." Derek's resentment toward me grew as Thomas continued praising my contributions while criticizing his son's performance. He began making subtle comments about technical people who think they're irreplaceable and the importance of remembering who actually owns the company. The dynamic became more complicated when Derek started dating Brittany Walsh, a marketing coordinator who had joined the company 6 months earlier. Brittany was ambitious and attractive, but her qualifications for her position were questionable at best. Thomas disapproved of workplace romances, especially when they involved his son and a subordinate employee. He worried that Derek's personal relationships were affecting his professional judgment and creating potential conflicts of interest. Mixing business with pleasure rarely ends well, Thomas warned Derek privately, but his son ignored the advice and continued flaunting his relationship with Brittany. As Derek's romance intensified, his hostility toward long-term employees like me increased. He seemed to view the company's existing culture and personnel as obstacles to his vision of modernizing the organization under his eventual leadership. The first major warning sign came when Derek suggested that the company could save money by outsourcing network administration to cheaper overseas contractors. He presented this idea during a board meeting, arguing that technology work was becoming commoditized and that internal expertise was no longer cost-effective. Thomas rejected the proposal immediately, pointing out that Morrison Data Solutions' reputation depended on maintaining direct control over all critical systems. "Our clients pay premium prices because they know we have the best people managing their infrastructure," he explained. "Outsourcing would destroy everything we've built." Derek's expression during that meeting revealed his frustration with being overruled by his father and his determination to implement changes when he gained control. His eyes found mine across the conference room, and I could see the calculation behind his smile. I realized that my position at Morrison Data Solutions, despite my proven value and Thomas's support, would become precarious once Derek assumed leadership. His personal dislike of me, combined with his misguided cost-cutting ambitions, represented a serious threat to my career security. But I also knew something that Derek didn't understand. Morrison Data Solutions depended entirely on institutional knowledge that couldn't be easily replaced. I had spent 9 years learning every system, every protocol, and every potential failure point across 25 data centers. The company's success wasn't just about having skilled technicians. It was about having technicians who understood the unique requirements and customizations that made each client's infrastructure function properly. This knowledge existed primarily in my head and in documentation that I had personally created and maintained. As I watched Derek's growing confidence about his future control of the company, I began taking precautions to protect myself. I updated my resume, networked with contacts at competing firms, and ensured that my documentation of critical systems was comprehensive and secure. What Derek would eventually discover was that firing the person who understood your entire technical infrastructure was not just unwise, it was potentially catastrophic. But by the time he learned that lesson, it would be too late to prevent the consequences of his arrogance and inexperience. Thomas Morrison's sudden heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March changed everything at Morrison Data Solutions. One moment he was reviewing quarterly performance reports in his corner office, and the next he was being rushed to Presbyterian Hospital in critical condition. The man who had built a data empire through meticulous attention to detail was fighting for his life, while his unprepared son scrambled to maintain business operations. Derek immediately assumed interim leadership of the company, despite having no experience with the technical complexities that drove daily operations. His first priority wasn't ensuring client service continuity or addressing employee concerns about Thomas's condition, it was consolidating power and implementing the changes his father had previously blocked. Within 48 hours of Thomas's hospitalization, Derek called an emergency staff meeting to announce his vision for modernizing Morrison Data Solutions. Standing in the main conference room with Brittany Walsh by his side, he outlined plans that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the business. "We need to eliminate redundant positions and streamline our operations," Derek declared, his voice carrying the artificial confidence of someone trying to project authority he didn't possess. Too many employees have been coasting on outdated job descriptions that don't reflect current market realities. His plan involved outsourcing most technical functions to overseas contractors who could provide equivalent services at a fraction of current labor costs. Network administration, security monitoring, and system maintenance would be handled by companies in India and Eastern Europe, rather than internal staff. The technology industry has evolved beyond requiring expensive local technicians, Derek continued, clearly repeating talking points he had gathered from business magazines rather than industry experience. Modern cloud computing and automation tools make most traditional IT roles obsolete. I listened to his presentation with growing horror, realizing that Derek planned to dismantle the very foundations of Morrison Data Solutions' success. The company's reputation depended on having skilled technicians who could respond to emergencies within minutes, not overseas contractors working in different time zones with limited understanding of client requirements. More disturbing was Derek's obvious plan to promote Brittany Walsh to a senior management position despite her lack of qualifications. He announced that she would become Director of Operations, responsible for coordinating with outsourced service providers and optimizing workflow efficiency. The promotion was clearly motivated by personal rather than professional considerations. Brittany had no technical background, no experience managing complex operations, and no understanding of the regulatory requirements that governed data center management for industries like healthcare and banking. After the meeting, I approached Derek privately to express my concerns about the outsourcing plan. I explained that Morrison Data Solutions clients chose the company specifically because of its reliable internal expertise and rapid response capabilities. "Derek, our service-level agreements guarantee 4-hour response times for critical issues," I said, trying to remain diplomatic while conveying the seriousness of the situation. Overseas contractors working in different time zones can't meet those commitments. Derek's response revealed both his arrogance and his fundamental misunderstanding of client relationships. "Sarah, you're thinking like a technician instead of a business leader," he said dismissively. "Clients care about cost savings, not where their service providers are located." I tried explaining that Fortune 500 companies paid premium prices for Morrison Data Solutions specifically because they needed guaranteed uptime and immediate support. Banks couldn't afford to wait 12 hours for network repairs, and hospitals required instant response to system failures. "You're being dramatic," Derek replied, his tone growing hostile. "Technology has advanced to the point where these systems basically run themselves. Most of what you do could be automated or handled remotely by cheaper providers." His ignorance was staggering. Derek genuinely believed that managing critical data infrastructure was simple enough for low-cost contractors to handle without specialized training or institutional knowledge. He had no understanding of the complexities involved in maintaining systems that supported billions of dollars in economic activity. Over the following weeks, as Thomas remained hospitalized and unconscious, Derek began implementing his cost-cutting measures with reckless speed. He terminated several experienced technicians and started negotiations with overseas outsourcing firms, apparently believing he could transition critical operations without disrupting client services. My position became increasingly precarious as Derek made it clear that long-term employees who questioned his vision were not welcome in his modernized organization. He began excluding me from important meetings and assigning my responsibilities to Brittany, despite her obvious lack of technical competence. The breaking point came when Derek announced that Brittany would assume control of network security protocols, one of the most critical aspects of data center operations. Security breaches could expose client data to cybercriminals and result in regulatory violations that would destroy the company's reputation. Brittany has been studying our security procedures and is ready to take on expanded responsibilities, Derek declared during a department meeting. Her fresh perspective will help us identify efficiency improvements that experienced staff might overlook. The suggestion that someone with 6 months of marketing experience could manage enterprise-level security systems was so absurd that I initially assumed Derek was joking. But his serious expression made it clear that he genuinely believed Brittany's enthusiasm could substitute for technical expertise. I requested a private meeting with Derek to discuss the security transition, hoping to convince him that this particular change was too dangerous to implement. Client data included everything from bank account information to medical records, and even minor security lapses could trigger federal investigations. Derek. Security protocols require specialized certification and years of experience, I explained, trying to maintain professional composure. One mistake could expose the company to millions of dollars in liability and destroy our reputation with clients. Derek's response revealed the personal animosity that was driving his decisions about my role in the company. Sarah, I appreciate your experience, but you need to accept that leadership sometimes requires fresh thinking, he said, his tone patronizing and dismissive. Brittany brings energy and new ideas that aren't constrained by outdated assumptions about how things have to be done. Maybe it's time for you to consider whether your approach to technology is still relevant in today's business environment. The message was clear. Derek wanted me gone, and he was using Brittany's promotion as a way to push me out while avoiding direct confrontation. He believed that making my position untenable would force me to resign voluntarily, saving him the trouble of formal termination. But Derek had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed that network administration was a replaceable commodity that could be transferred to cheaper providers without consequences. What he didn't understand was that Morrison Data Solutions' 25 data centers operated as an integrated system that required intimate knowledge of every component. I had spent 9 years learning the unique configurations, custom protocols, and specialized procedures that kept each data center functioning optimally. This knowledge wasn't documented in manuals that could be handed to replacement contractors. It existed primarily in my memory and experience. Moreover, I had designed many of the security measures, backup systems, and emergency procedures that protected client operations. These systems were customized for specific client requirements and regulatory environments, making them impossible for outsiders to understand or maintain effectively. As Derek continued pressuring me to accept Brittany's expanded role, I began preparing for what seemed like an inevitable confrontation. I updated my personal documentation of critical systems, secured backup copies of important files, and started exploring job opportunities with competing firms. What Derek failed to realize was that his plan to replace experienced technicians with cheaper alternatives would create a catastrophic vulnerability that I alone understood how to exploit. Morrison Data Solutions had built its reputation on reliability, but that reliability depended entirely on people like me who understood how to prevent the disasters that Derek's changes would inevitably cause. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test whether institutional knowledge and technical expertise could overcome corporate arrogance and personal vendetta. Derek believed he held all the power, but he was about to learn that in the technology industry, knowledge is the ultimate form of leverage. 3 weeks after Thomas Morrison's heart attack, Derek's management style revealed itself as a toxic combination of nepotism, cost-cutting obsession, and personal vendetta disguised as corporate modernization. The company that Thomas had built on technical excellence was rapidly deteriorating under his son's misguided leadership. Derek's promotion of Brittany Walsh to Director of Operations created chaos throughout the organization. Experienced technicians who had worked for Morrison Data Solutions for years suddenly found themselves reporting to someone who couldn't distinguish between a router and a server. Critical decisions about system maintenance and security protocols were being made by someone whose primary qualification was her romantic relationship with the owner's son. The first major crisis occurred when Brittany approved a routine software update across multiple data centers without understanding the potential compatibility issues. The update crashed 12 servers simultaneously, causing 4-hour outages for 3 major clients, including a regional bank and a medical device manufacturer. I worked frantically to restore services while Derek blamed the incident on legacy system problems that justified his outsourcing plans. He used the crisis as evidence that Morrison Data Solutions needed to modernize its infrastructure rather than acknowledging that proper testing procedures would have prevented the disaster entirely. This proves my point about outdated systems requiring constant patches and fixes, Derek announced during the post-incident meeting. Modern cloud-based solutions would eliminate these vulnerabilities while reducing our operational costs. His analysis ignored the fact that the outage was caused by human error rather than technical failure. Brittany had bypassed standard testing protocols because she didn't understand their importance, not because the systems were inherently unreliable. Meanwhile, Derek's negotiations with overseas outsourcing firms progressed rapidly. He signed preliminary contracts with 3 companies based in India and Romania, planning to transition network monitoring and basic maintenance tasks within 60 days. The cost savings looked impressive on paper, but the hidden risks were enormous. I tried explaining to Derek that network administration for Fortune 500 clients required more than basic technical skills. Morrison Data Solutions' reputation depended on understanding each client's unique requirements, regulatory compliance needs, and business continuity priorities. Derek, these outsourcing firms work with dozens of clients using standardized procedures, I said during one particularly frustrating conversation. They don't have the specialized knowledge needed to maintain custom configurations for healthcare systems or banking networks. Derek dismissed my concerns with characteristic arrogance. Sarah, you're overcomplicating basic technology services, he replied. Network monitoring is network monitoring, regardless of the industry. These contractors have certifications and experience managing similar systems. His response revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what Morrison Data Solutions actually provided to clients. We weren't just monitoring standard networks. We maintained complex, customized infrastructures that supported mission-critical operations for companies that couldn't afford downtime. The breaking point in our relationship came when Derek announced that I would be transitioning out of my role as senior network administrator to make room for the new outsourcing model. He framed this as a voluntary career change rather than termination, apparently believing this would reduce potential legal complications. We're offering you a generous severance package and excellent references, Derek explained, his tone suggesting he was doing me a favor. This gives you an opportunity to find a position that better matches your skill set in today's evolving technology landscape. The offer was insulting both financially and professionally. After 9 years of dedicated service and critical contributions to the company's success, Derek was essentially firing me to make room for cheaper contractors who lacked my expertise and experience. More personally hurtful was Derek's obvious pleasure in exercising power over someone his father had trusted and respected. This wasn't just a business decision, it was revenge against employees who represented Thomas's leadership style and values. I refused Derek's severance offer and demanded a formal termination meeting with proper documentation. If he wanted me gone, he would have to fire me officially rather than pressuring me to resign voluntarily. Derek's anger at my refusal revealed the personal nature of his vendetta. Sarah, you're making this more difficult than necessary, he said, his professional facade cracking. I'm trying to handle this transition respectfully, but your attitude is making that challenging. During this period, I received devastating news about Thomas's medical condition. His doctors explained that the heart attack had caused significant brain damage, making full recovery unlikely. Even if Thomas survived, he would never be able to resume control of Morrison Data Solutions. The news meant that Derek's control over the company was permanent rather than temporary. There would be no intervention from Thomas to prevent the dismantling of everything he had built over decades of careful development. As Derek's termination deadline approached, I began preparing for what I knew would be a dramatic confrontation. 9 years of working at Morrison Data Solutions had given me unprecedented knowledge of every system, every vulnerability, and every critical failure point across all 25 data centers. I had designed most of the security protocols, emergency procedures, and backup systems that protected client operations. More importantly, I had configured many of these systems with safeguards that required my personal authorization to modify or disable. Derek assumed that firing me would simply eliminate an expensive employee who opposed his modernization plans. What he didn't understand was that my departure would also remove the institutional knowledge needed to maintain the very systems he was planning to outsource. The outsourcing firms Derek had contracted were competent at basic network management, but they lacked understanding of Morrison Data Solutions' customized configurations and specialized protocols. Without proper transition training, they would be unable to maintain the reliability standards that clients expected. Even more critically, Derek had no idea that many critical systems included automated shutdown procedures designed to prevent unauthorized access or tampering. These safeguards would activate if proper authentication protocols weren't followed during personnel transitions. I had implemented these security measures over years of gradually improving system protection, with Thomas's full approval and support. They were designed to prevent exactly the kind of hasty personnel changes that Derek was attempting without understanding potential consequences. As the termination meeting approached, I felt a strange combination of sadness and anticipation. Sadness for the destruction of Thomas's legacy and the end of my career at a company I had helped build, but also anticipation for Derek's education about the real-world consequences of arrogance and inexperience. Derek believed that owning a company meant he could make any decision without regard for technical expertise or operational reality. He was about to learn that in the data management industry, knowledge and experience are more powerful than ownership and authority. The confrontation that would determine Morrison Data Solutions' future was now inevitable. Derek had chosen to prioritize his personal preferences and cost-cutting obsessions over business continuity and client service. The consequences of those choices would become apparent very quickly after my departure. 2 weeks before my termination, I submitted a comprehensive risk assessment report to Derek Morrison that detailed the catastrophic vulnerabilities his outsourcing plan would create. The 20-page document outlined potential security breaches, system failures, and client service disruptions that would result from replacing experienced internal staff with overseas contractors. The report wasn't just a professional obligation, it was also legal protection. If Morrison Data Solutions experienced major problems after my departure, this document would prove that I had warned management about predictable consequences of their decisions. I structured the assessment around specific client requirements and regulatory compliance issues that overseas contractors would struggle to address. Healthcare clients needed HIPAA-compliant security measures, financial services required SOX compliance protocols, and government contracts demanded specialized clearance procedures. Outsourcing network administration to foreign contractors will violate several client contracts that specifically require U.S.-based personnel with appropriate security clearances, I wrote in the executive summary. These violations could result in contract terminations worth over $40 million annually. The report also explained technical vulnerabilities that would emerge during the transition period. Morrison Data Solutions systems included numerous custom configurations that weren't documented in standard manuals. These modifications had been implemented over years of addressing specific client needs and couldn't be easily transferred to replacement contractors. Critical system knowledge exists primarily in institutional memory rather than formal documentation, I warned. Rapid personnel transitions without proper training periods will create knowledge gaps that compromise system reliability and security. Derek's response to my report revealed both his arrogance and his fundamental misunderstanding of the issues I had raised. Instead of addressing the technical concerns, he focused on what he perceived as insubordination and resistance to his authority. Sarah, this report reads like a threat, rather than professional analysis, Derek said during our meeting to discuss my findings. It seems like you're trying to sabotage necessary business improvements because they affect your personal job security. I tried explaining that my concerns were based on objective technical assessments rather than personal interests. The outsourcing contractors Derek had selected might be competent at standard network management, but they lacked the specialized knowledge needed for Morrison Data Solutions' customized environment. Derek, I'm not trying to protect my position, I said, maintaining professional composure despite his accusatory tone. I'm trying to protect the company and its clients from preventable disasters that will cost far more than any potential savings from outsourcing. Derek dismissed my warnings with characteristic contempt for technical expertise. Sarah, you're overestimating the complexity of basic network administration, he replied. These contractors manage similar systems for dozens of clients. They have the certifications and experience needed to handle our requirements. His confidence was based on superficial similarities between Morrison Data Solutions and other data management companies. Derek couldn't distinguish between generic network services and the specialized, customized infrastructure that his father had spent decades developing. The most frustrating aspect of our conversation was Derek's obvious belief that my opposition stemmed from personal animosity toward Brittany Walsh rather than legitimate professional concerns. He seemed to view the entire situation as a personality conflict rather than a technical assessment. I think your judgment about this transition is being influenced by personal feelings, Derek said, his tone suggesting that my concerns weren't worth serious consideration. Maybe you need to step back and consider whether your perspective is objective. His attempt to psychoanalyze my motivations was both insulting and revealing. Derek couldn't conceive that someone might oppose his decisions based on technical expertise rather than personal grievances. After my report was dismissed without serious consideration, I began documenting my interactions with Derek and preserving evidence of the warnings I had provided. If Morrison Data Solutions experienced the problems I had predicted, this documentation would prove that management had been properly informed about potential consequences. I also began preparing personal security measures to protect myself from potential retaliation. Derek's hostility toward dissenting voices suggested that he might try to damage my professional reputation after my departure, possibly by blaming me for problems caused by his own decisions. My preparation included securing backup copies of important technical documentation, updating my professional network contacts, and consulting with an employment attorney about potential wrongful termination claims. Derek's personal vendetta was clearly influencing his business decisions, creating potential legal vulnerabilities. The most concerning development was Derek's decision to accelerate the outsourcing timeline despite my warnings about inadequate preparation. Originally planned as a gradual transition over 6 months, he now wanted to complete the changeover within 30 days of my departure. We need to move quickly to realize cost savings and eliminate resistance to necessary changes, Derek explained during a staff meeting. Prolonged transition periods just create more opportunities for disruption and delays. His rushed timeline virtually guaranteed the problems I had predicted. Outsourcing contractors would assume responsibility for critical systems without adequate training, documentation, or understanding of client requirements. Meanwhile, Brittany Walsh's expanding role in operations management created additional risks. Her lack of technical knowledge meant she couldn't identify or prevent problems before they became crises. She was essentially flying blind while managing systems that supported billions of dollars in economic activity. Derek's retaliation against my warnings took several forms. He excluded me from meetings about the outsourcing transition, restricted my access to certain systems, and began spreading rumors about my negative attitude and resistance to change. More concerning was his attempt to discredit my technical expertise by suggesting that my warnings were motivated by fear of technological obsolescence. Derek portrayed me as an outdated technician who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. Some people get comfortable with old ways of doing things and resist innovation, Derek told other employees, clearly referring to me. Change is always difficult for people who've been doing the same job for a long time. His characterization was both unfair and inaccurate. I had consistently advocated for technological improvements and process innovations throughout my tenure at Morrison Data Solutions. The difference was that I understood which changes would improve operations and which ones would create catastrophic risks. As my termination date approached, I made final attempts to ensure that critical system information would be available after my departure. I updated documentation files, created emergency procedure guides, and prepared detailed explanations of custom configurations. Derek rejected most of my transition planning efforts, apparently viewing them as attempts to make myself indispensable, rather than responsible. Preparation for personnel changes. He seemed to believe that documenting complex technical procedures was unnecessary because the outsourcing contractors would handle everything differently. We don't need extensive documentation for systems that are being replaced, Derek said when I offered to create comprehensive training materials. The new contractors will implement their own procedures based on industry standards. His response confirmed my assessment that Derek fundamentally misunderstood what Morrison Data Solutions provided to clients. He thought he was buying generic network services when he was actually dismantling customized solutions that had taken years to perfect. The stage was now set for a confrontation that would test whether Derek's arrogance could overcome the technical realities he refused to acknowledge. He had dismissed expert warnings, accelerated dangerous timelines, and eliminated the institutional knowledge needed to maintain critical systems. What Derek didn't realize was that his actions had created exactly the kind of catastrophic vulnerability that I had spent years protecting Morrison Data Solutions against. The safeguards I had implemented would soon demonstrate why experience and expertise matter more than cost savings and personal vendettas. The final confrontation took place on a Thursday morning in Morrison Data Solutions' marble-floored executive conference room. Derek had scheduled the meeting for 9:30 a.m., choosing the company's most formal setting to emphasize his authority and make the termination as humiliating as possible. I arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio containing final documentation and my company security badge. The conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of downtown Dallas, but the atmosphere inside was cold and hostile. Derek sat at the head of the polished mahogany table with Brittany Walsh beside him, her presence clearly intended to underscore the personal nature of my dismissal. She wore a smug expression that suggested she was enjoying the power dynamics of the situation. "Sarah, thank you for coming," Derek began with false courtesy, his tone suggesting this was a routine business meeting rather than a termination. "I wanted to discuss some changes to your role here at Morrison Data Solutions." His euphemistic language was typical of Derek's approach to difficult conversations. Rather than acknowledging that he was firing me after 9 years of dedicated service, he framed the termination as a voluntary transition to new opportunities. "We've decided to restructure our technical operations to better align with current industry trends," Derek continued, reading from prepared notes. "Your position as Senior Network Administrator will be eliminated as part of our modernization initiative." I listened to his carefully scripted explanation without interruption, noting the lack of any acknowledgement of my contributions to the company's success. Derek treated my termination as if he was disposing of obsolete equipment rather than ending a professional relationship. "We're prepared to offer you a severance package equivalent to 6 weeks' salary, along with continuation of health insurance for 3 months, Derek said, sliding a folder across the table. "We believe this is a generous offer that reflects our appreciation for your service." The proposed severance was insulting given my 9 years of employment and critical role in maintaining the company's technical infrastructure. Derek was essentially paying me the minimum amount required to avoid legal complications while maximizing his cost savings. More insulting was Derek's obvious expectation that I would accept the termination gracefully and disappear without creating problems for his outsourcing plans. He seemed to believe that financial pressure would force me to cooperate with his agenda. "Derek, I need to ask you directly," I said, setting aside his severance folder without opening it. "Are you terminating my employment because of my technical performance, or because I opposed your outsourcing plan?" The question caught Derek off guard because he hadn't expected direct confrontation. His prepared script didn't include responses to challenges about his motivations or decision-making process. "Sarah, this is about business efficiency and adapting to market conditions," Derek replied, his tone becoming defensive. "Personal feelings don't factor into strategic business decisions." His denial was unconvincing, given the obvious personal animosity he had displayed toward me for months. Derek's hostility had been apparent since his father's heart attack, when I became a symbol of everything he wanted to change about Morrison Data Solutions. I decided to make the conversation more explicit by addressing the elephant in the room. Derek, for 9 years I've kept all 25 of your father's data centers online, I said, my voice steady and professional. Now you're firing me to make room for your girlfriend? The directness of my question visibly rattled Derek, who clearly hadn't expected me to challenge his authority so bluntly. Brittany shifted uncomfortably in her chair, apparently surprised that her role in my termination was being discussed openly. That's an inappropriate characterization of legitimate business reorganization, Derek replied, his voice rising slightly. Brittany's qualifications and our outsourcing decisions are based on objective business criteria. I almost laughed at his claim that Brittany's promotion was based on qualifications rather than personal relationships. Her 6 months of marketing experience hardly qualified her to manage network security for Fortune 500 clients. Derek, Brittany doesn't have the technical knowledge or security clearances required for the responsibilities you've assigned her, I said, maintaining professional tone despite my growing frustration. This restructuring will compromise client service and create serious liability risks. Derek's response revealed the arrogance that had driven his decisions throughout this process. Sarah, I don't need your permission or approval for personnel decisions, he snapped. I own this company, and I'll run it as I see fit. His emphasis on ownership rather than competence perfectly captured Derek's approach to business leadership. He believed that inherited wealth and legal authority were sufficient qualifications for managing complex technical operations. That's when I delivered the line I had been preparing for weeks. Effective immediately, you said? Derek nodded impatiently, clearly wanting to conclude the meeting and begin implementing his plans. I removed my security badge from the leather portfolio and placed it precisely in the center of the polished conference table. The small plastic card represented 9 years of dedicated service and institutional knowledge that Derek was carelessly discarding. You have 5 minutes before every single one of those data centers goes offline, I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Derek's face went pale as he began to comprehend the implications of what I had just told him. Brittany looked confused, clearly not understanding the technical significance of my statement. What are you talking about? Derek demanded, his confident demeanor cracking as he realized he might have miscalculated the consequences of my termination. I had spent months preparing for this moment, implementing security protocols that would activate automatically when my employment ended. These safeguards were designed to prevent unauthorized access to critical systems during personnel transitions. Derek, you just fired the only person who knows how to maintain your father's data centers, I explained calmly. In 5 minutes, automated security protocols will begin shutting down systems to prevent potential breaches. The truth was even worse than Derek realized. I had configured critical systems with authentication requirements that only I could satisfy. Without my active oversight, these systems would assume they were under attack and implement emergency shutdown procedures. Derek's arrogance had led him to fire the one person who understood how to prevent the very disasters he was now facing. His cost-cutting obsession and personal vendetta had created a catastrophic vulnerability that was about to destroy everything his father had built. As the seconds ticked by, Derek's expression shifted from anger to confusion to growing panic. He was beginning to understand that owning a technology company didn't automatically grant him the knowledge needed to operate it successfully. The confrontation that would determine Morrison Data Solutions' survival was about to begin, and Derek was completely unprepared for the technical realities he had ignored for months. The conference room fell silent except for the ticking of Derek's expensive Swiss watch as reality began dawning on him. 4 minutes and 15 seconds remained before automated security protocols would begin cascading shutdowns across 25 data centers, affecting hundreds of clients and millions of dollars in transactions. Derek's face cycled through emotions like a traffic light: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, stark terror as he grasped the magnitude of his miscalculation. "You can't shut down client systems," he stammered, his voice cracking under pressure. "That's sabotage. I'll have you arrested." I remained seated calmly, watching Derek's composure disintegrate as he confronted the consequences of his arrogance. "Derek, I'm not shutting down anything," I explained with clinical precision. "You just terminated the employment of the only person authorized to prevent automated security shutdowns." Brittany Walsh looked back and forth between us with growing panic, clearly understanding that something catastrophic was happening, but lacking the technical knowledge to comprehend the details. Her promotion to director of operations suddenly seemed like a cruel joke rather than a romantic gesture. "What automated shutdowns?" Derek demanded, his executive confidence evaporating as he realized he had stumbled into a technical nightmare. "Why wasn't I informed about these security protocols?" His question revealed the depth of his ignorance about the systems he had inherited from his father. Thomas Morrison had implemented comprehensive security measures over decades of careful planning, but Derek had never bothered learning about these safeguards. "Derek, these protocols are documented in the security manual that your father created," I said, enjoying his growing desperation. "They're designed to prevent unauthorized access during personnel transitions. When key technical staff are terminated without proper handover procedures, the systems assume a security breach and initiate emergency shutdowns." The irony was perfect. Derek's attempt to save money by firing me had triggered the very security measures designed to protect the company's most valuable assets. His father's careful planning was about to destroy Derek's reckless cost-cutting scheme. "Cancel the protocols," Derek ordered, his voice rising to near-panic levels. "Use your access to stop the shutdowns." I shook my head with mock sympathy. "I can't access systems without my security badge," I replied, gesturing toward the plastic card sitting on the conference table. "The badge you asked me to surrender when you terminated my employment." Derek lunged for my badge, apparently thinking he could somehow use it to prevent the impending disaster. But security badges were biometrically linked to individual employees. Derek's fingerprints and retinal scans wouldn't match the authorization database. "3 minutes, Derek," I announced, checking my watch with theatrical precision. "I hope those overseas contractors you hired can figure out Thomas Morrison's custom security protocols before your clients start losing data." The mention of overseas contractors sent Derek into full panic mode. The Romanian and Indian firms he had contracted possessed basic networking skills but no understanding of Morrison Data Solutions' specialized configurations and proprietary protocols. "Sarah, please," Derek begged, his executive arrogance completely gone. "Tell me how to stop this. I'll give you your job back. I'll increase your salary. Whatever you want." His desperation was satisfying after months of condescension and personal attacks. Derek was learning that technical expertise couldn't be replaced by enthusiasm, cost-cutting, or romantic relationships. "Derek, even if you reinstated my employment, the security protocols can't be canceled once initiated," I explained with false regret. "Your father designed these systems to be foolproof. Even he couldn't override them during emergency situations." This was partially true. Thomas had indeed created tamper-proof security measures. What I didn't mention was that I had enhanced these protocols over the years, adding layers of authentication that only I fully understood. 2 minutes, I announced as Derek frantically called the Network Operations Center, demanding that technicians prevent the shutdown sequence. But the remaining technical staff lacked the authorization codes needed to modify critical security protocols. Derek's phone conversations became increasingly frantic as employees explained their inability to override systems they didn't fully understand. The institutional knowledge that Derek had dismissed as outdated was proving essential for preventing catastrophe. Brittany Walsh had gone completely silent, apparently realizing that her promotion to director of operations was meaningless if there were no operations left to direct. Her marketing background hadn't prepared her for managing technical crises that could bankrupt the company. 1 minute, Derek, I said, rising from my chair and collecting my leather portfolio. "I wish you the best of luck explaining to your clients why their data centers are offline because you fired your senior network administrator." Derek made one final desperate attempt to prevent the crisis. "Sarah, I'll pay you a consultant fee," he offered, Name your price to fix this problem. I paused at the conference room door, savoring Derek's complete reversal from arrogant executive to desperate supplicant. Derek, consultant fees for emergency technical support start at $500 per hour, I said thoughtfully. But unfortunately, I'm not available for consulting work today. 20 seconds, I announced, watching Derek's face as he realized that his cost-cutting obsession had created a disaster that would cost far more than any potential savings from outsourcing. Derek's expensive Swiss watch reached 9:35 a.m., exactly as emergency klaxons began sounding throughout the Morrison Data Solutions building. Red warning lights flashed in the Network Operations Center as automated systems began implementing security shutdowns across the entire data center network. Client monitoring displays shifted from green to yellow to red as servers, network connections, and security systems went offline in sequence. The cascade failure was exactly what Thomas Morrison's security protocols were designed to create: total isolation to prevent data breaches during unauthorized access attempts. Derek stood frozen in the conference room, watching his inheritance disappear in real time as emergency procedures dismantled 25 years of careful infrastructure development. The company his father had built was shutting itself down because Derek had fired the one person who could prevent it. My phone began ringing as panicked clients discovered their systems were offline. Banks, hospitals, government agencies, and Fortune 500 companies that depended on Morrison Data Solutions for critical infrastructure were experiencing simultaneous service failures. Derek, your outsourcing contractors should be receiving emergency calls any minute now, I said, checking my phone's caller ID. I hope they understand Thomas Morrison's custom protocols better than you do. As I walked toward the elevator, Derek's voice echoed down the marble hallway behind me. Sarah, come back. We need to talk. I'll double your salary. But it was too late for negotiation. Derek had made his choice when he prioritized personal vendetta over business continuity. The consequences of that decision were now cascading through every aspect of Morrison Data Solutions operations. The elevator doors closed on Derek's desperate shouts as emergency systems completed their shutdown sequence. 25 data centers across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico were now dark, taking with them the infrastructure that supported hundreds of client operations. Derek Morrison had wanted to modernize his father's company by replacing expensive internal expertise with cheaper overseas contractors. Instead, he had created the largest data center failure in regional history, destroying the reputation Thomas Morrison had spent decades building. The corporate checkmate was complete, and Derek was about to learn that in the technology industry, expertise and experience are the most valuable assets money can't replace. By Monday morning, Morrison Data Solutions was facing the largest technological crisis in its 25-year history. Derek Morrison sat in his father's corner office surrounded by lawyers, insurance adjusters, and crisis management consultants, watching his inheritance collapse in real time. The cascade failure I had triggered affected over 300 client organizations across the southwestern United States. Hospitals were running on backup generators, banks had shifted to manual processing systems, and government agencies were operating without their primary data networks. The economic impact measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Derek's attempts to restore service using overseas contractors had failed spectacularly. The Romanian and Indian firms he had contracted possessed neither the security clearances nor the specialized knowledge needed to understand Thomas Morrison's custom protocols. Their efforts to bypass security systems had only triggered additional safeguards, making the situation worse. Sir, we need the original system architect to restore these configurations, the lead contractor explained during a desperate video conference call. These are proprietary protocols that don't match industry standards. We cannot proceed without documentation from the person who designed them. Derek's face was haggard as he realized the full scope of his miscalculation. The cost savings he had expected from outsourcing were meaningless compared to the catastrophic liability he now faced from service failures. My phone had been ringing constantly since Thursday afternoon as headhunters, competing firms, and news organizations sought interviews about the Morrison Data Solutions collapse. Word had spread quickly through the technology industry that a single termination decision had brought down an entire regional data empire. "Sarah, this is incredible," said Janet Martinez, CTO of Dallas Cloud Services, Morrison's largest competitor. "We're receiving dozens of calls from companies looking for new data management providers. Can you start Monday? We'll match whatever Morrison was paying you, plus a 50% signing bonus." The job offers were flattering and lucrative, but I had different plans for my immediate future. Derek Morrison's education in corporate humility was far from complete, and I intended to finish the lesson I had started. Tuesday afternoon, Derek called my personal phone number with an offer that revealed the desperation of his situation. "Sarah, I need your help," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll give you anything you want. Equity in the company, a promotion to CTO, whatever it takes to fix this." His tone was completely different from the arrogant executive who had fired me 5 days earlier. Derek had learned that owning a technology company was meaningless without the expertise to operate it successfully. "Derek, I appreciate the offer," I replied calmly, "but I'm not interested in returning to Morrison Data Solutions under any circumstances." "Then tell me what you want," Derek pleaded. "Consulting fees, a partnership agreement, anything. I just need you to restore the systems so we can save the company." His willingness to offer partnership status to someone he had dismissed as an obsolete technician demonstrated how completely his worldview had changed. Derek now understood that technical expertise was the foundation of his father's empire. "Derek, I'll consider a consulting agreement under specific conditions," I said, outlining terms that would shock him. $5 million up front, full executive authority over all technical operations, and Brittany Walsh's immediate termination. The silence on Derek's end lasted nearly 30 seconds as he processed my demands. $5 million was more than most people earned in a lifetime, and executive authority would essentially make me the real power behind Morrison Data Solutions. "Sarah, those terms are substantial," Derek finally replied. "I need time to consider them." "You have until Thursday at 5 p.m., I said, giving him exactly the same termination timeline he had given me. "After that, I'll accept one of the competing offers I've received." Derek's situation grew worse each day as client contracts were terminated and lawsuits were filed. Morrison Data Solutions faced potential damages exceeding $100 million, along with regulatory violations that could result in criminal charges. Meanwhile, Thomas Morrison remained unconscious in intensive care, unaware that his life's work was being destroyed by his son's arrogance and inexperience. The irony was devastating. Derek's attempt to modernize his father's company had instead dismantled everything Thomas had built. Thursday afternoon arrived without any communication from Derek. At exactly 5 p.m., I received a call from Morrison Data Solutions Board of Directors, specifically the independent members who weren't related to the Morrison family. "Miss Chen, we'd like to discuss a different arrangement," said Board Chairman Robert Walsh, Brittany's uncle and a respected technology industry veteran. "The board has voted to remove Derek Morrison from executive management and offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer." The proposal was stunning in its scope and implications. Morrison Data Solutions Board was essentially offering me control of the company that had fired me 1 week earlier. "The board recognizes that Derek's decisions created this crisis," Robert continued. "We're prepared to offer you complete operational authority, a substantial equity stake, and whatever resources you need to rebuild the company's reputation." I accepted the position with conditions that protected both my interests and the company's future stability. Derek would retain ownership but no operational authority. Brittany Walsh would be terminated immediately. All overseas outsourcing contracts would be canceled, and experienced technical staff would be rehired at premium salaries. The restoration of Morrison Data Solutions took 6 months of intensive work, but the company not only survived but emerged stronger than before. New security protocols prevented unauthorized access while maintaining operational flexibility. Client relationships were rebuilt through transparent communication and enhanced service guarantees. Derek Morrison learned lessons about leadership that business school had never taught him. Technical expertise couldn't be replaced by enthusiasm or cost-cutting measures. Institutional knowledge was a valuable asset that took years to develop and seconds to destroy. Personal vendettas had no place in strategic business decisions. Most importantly, Derek discovered that real leadership meant recognizing and valuing the contributions of skilled employees rather than dismissing them as obsolete obstacles to modernization. The technology industry is built on knowledge, innovation, and expertise that can't be outsourced or automated away. Companies that understand this principle thrive, while those that treat technical talent as a commodity face the kind of catastrophic failures that Derek experienced. My experience at Morrison Data Solutions taught me that standing up for professional integrity sometimes requires dramatic action. Derek's attempt to destroy my career backfired because he underestimated both my expertise and my willingness to defend the systems I had spent years building. In the end, competence and knowledge proved more valuable than ownership and authority. Derek owned Morrison Data Solutions, but I understood how to make it function. That knowledge gave me power that no termination letter could eliminate. The corporate world is filled with Derek Morrisons, people who inherit or achieve positions of authority without developing the skills needed to exercise that authority effectively. They believe that titles and ownership rights are sufficient qualifications for making complex technical decisions. But in today's technology-driven economy, expertise and institutional knowledge are the real sources of power. Companies succeed or fail based on their ability to attract, retain, and empower the skilled professionals who understand how modern systems actually work. Have you ever worked for someone who didn't understand the technical aspects of their own business? How did their lack of expertise affect company operations and employee morale? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your stories might help others recognize similar situations before they become catastrophic. If this story inspired you to value technical expertise and institutional knowledge in your own career, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about workplace dynamics and professional development. Share this with someone who might be dealing with incompetent management. They might find encouragement in seeing how expertise ultimately triumphs over arrogance. Thank you for joining me on this journey from termination to corporate leadership. Remember that your skills and knowledge are valuable assets that no one can take away from you, even when they try to take away your job. Stay confident in your expertise, stand up for your principles, and never let anyone convince you that experience and competence are obsolete.